2:47 a.m. The trauma bay doors of Crescent Valley Medical exploded inward as 4 soldiers dragged a bleeding operative across the threshold, his chest soaked crimson, his breath rattling like broken machinery. But nobody was looking at the blood. They were staring at the dog, a 100-pound combat shepherd that came through those doors like a missile, teeth bared, eyes locked on anyone who moved wrong. Security guards reached for their sidearms. 2 nurses stumbled backward into equipment carts. The animal snarled low, territorial, violent. One wrong move and bullets would fly in a packed emergency room. Then a woman nobody had noticed in 3 years stepped between them. Olivia Reed, 32, blonde hair pulled into a careless knot, wearing scrubs so faded they looked gray under fluorescent lights, knelt in front of a beast trained to kill. She whispered something nobody else could hear. The dog froze mid-growl, dropped, settled beside the stretcher like a statue. The room went silent. A attending physician stared at her like she'd just performed surgery with her bare hands. "What the hell did you just say?" Olivia stood without answering. Outside, helicopter rotors began hammering the night sky. But the bird wasn't coming for the dying man on the gurney. It was coming for the nurse. Before we go any further, if you're hooked, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's go. The operative on the stretcher wasn't breathing right. His name was Lieutenant Marcus Shaw, according to the blood-smeared ID clipped to his tactical vest, and judging by the way his lung was collapsing, he had maybe 6 minutes before his brain started dying from lack of oxygen. The trauma team moved fast, but not fast enough. 2 residents were trying to establish lines while a third fumbled with intubation equipment. The dog, they were calling him Ranger now, though nobody had confirmed that, stood rigid beside the gurney, growling every time someone's hands got too close to Shaw's torso. "Somebody get that animal out of here," Dr. Peter Lansing barked. He was the senior attending on duty, a man who'd spent 20 years in emergency medicine and had no patience for complications that weren't medical. "Security, now." 2 guards approached cautiously, hands hovering near their holsters. Ranger's growl deepened into something that sounded like a chainsaw starting up. The soldiers who'd brought Shaw in didn't move to help. They stood near the wall, rifles slung, faces unreadable. One of them, a staff sergeant with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, shook his head slowly. "Don't," he said. "That dog won't leave him. You try to force it. Somebody's getting torn apart." "Then how do we work?" Lansing snapped. Nobody answered. That's when Olivia Reed moved. She'd been standing near the supply cabinets, out of the way, doing what she always did, staying invisible. Most of the staff had stopped noticing her years ago. She was competent, quiet, never caused problems, never made waves. She picked up shifts nobody wanted, worked holidays without complaint, and faded into the background so completely that new residents often forgot her name. Some of the nurses had started calling her the ghost behind her back, not because she was creepy, but because she had this way of being present without being seen. She walked past Lansing, past the guards, past everyone who mattered, and dropped into a crouch beside Ranger. The dog's head snapped toward her, teeth still bared. For a second, everyone in the trauma bay held their breath. Olivia didn't flinch. She locked eyes with the animal, steady and calm, and spoke 6 words in a language that sounded like German, but wasn't quite. Her voice was low, controlled, clipped at the edges like military radio chatter. Ranger's ears flicked forward, his growl cut off mid-rumble. He looked at Shaw, then back at Olivia, and slowly, deliberately, lowered himself onto the floor beside the stretcher. His body stayed coiled, ready to spring, but the aggression drained out of him like water through a sieve. The trauma bay went silent. Lansing stared at her. "What did you just do?" Olivia stood, brushing her hands on her scrubs. "Told him to stand down." "In what language? Does it matter?" She glanced at Shaw, whose lips were starting to turn blue. "You've got about 4 minutes before he codes. I'd stop staring and start working." Lansing blinked, then snapped back into motion. "Get me a chest tube kit. Move." The team surged forward. Olivia stepped back, blending into the periphery again, but the staff sergeant with the scar kept watching her. His eyes were narrow, calculating. He'd seen something in those 6 words that nobody else had caught. The surgery lasted 40 minutes. Shaw's lung had been punctured by shrapnel, something small and jagged that had torn through his vest during what the soldiers were calling a training incident. Nobody believed that story, least of all Olivia, but she kept her mouth shut and assisted where needed. Handed instruments, monitored vitals, stayed out of the way. Ranger remained on the floor the entire time, motionless, except for his eyes, which tracked every hand that came near Shaw's body. When Lansing finally closed the incision, Shaw's vitals stabilized. Not great, but stable. The surgical team exhaled collectively. One of the residents, a kid named Danny Park, who still got nervous around chest trauma, leaned against the wall and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Jesus," he muttered. "That was close." Lansing stripped off his gloves and turned toward the soldiers. "He's stable for now, but he needs monitoring. We'll move him to ICU once—" He stopped mid-sentence. The staff sergeant was staring at Olivia again, and this time his expression had shifted from curiosity to something colder. Recognition, maybe, or suspicion. "You," he said. His voice was flat, controlled. "What's your name?" Olivia met his gaze without blinking. "Reed. Olivia Reed. Where'd you learn that command sequence?" "I didn't. I guessed." The lie came out smooth, effortless, practiced. The sergeant didn't buy it. His jaw tightened, but before he could push, the sound of helicopter rotors grew deafening overhead. The entire building vibrated. Equipment rattled on metal trays. Someone's coffee cup slid off a counter and shattered on the tile floor. Lansing frowned. "What the hell is that?" The sergeant didn't answer. He was already moving toward the stairwell, motioning for his team to follow. Olivia watched them go, her expression unreadable, and something cold settled in her chest. She knew what was coming. She'd known the moment she'd opened her mouth in front of Ranger. Stupid. So goddamn stupid. 3 years of silence erased in 6 words. She turned toward the scrub sink, intending to wash up and disappear into the night shift chaos, but Dr. Lansing stepped into her path. "Reed," he said slowly, "how did you know what to say to that dog?" "Lucky guess." "Bullshit." His voice wasn't angry, just confused. "That wasn't a guess. That was training. Where'd you serve?" Olivia's hand stilled on the faucet. For a moment she considered lying again, spinning some story about a boyfriend in the military or a brother who'd been a dog handler. But Lansing wasn't stupid, and the soldiers upstairs weren't going to let this drop. "I didn't," she said quietly. "I was never military." Technically true. Her file said she'd never existed. Lansing opened his mouth to argue, but the trauma bay doors swung open and 4 men in tactical gear strode inside. Not soldiers this time. These were officers, real ones, with insignia that marked them as high-level command. The lead man was tall, maybe 6'3", with iron-gray hair cut close to his scalp and eyes that could strip paint off a wall. He scanned the room once, taking in the blood on the floor, the surgical instruments, Ranger still lying beside Shaw's gurney. Then his gaze landed on Olivia. His face went white. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Olivia stood frozen at the scrub sink, water still running over her hands, and the officer stared at her like she was a ghost he'd watched burn 10 years ago. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand in a crisp military salute. The trauma bay went dead silent. "Lieutenant Reed," he said. His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. "We buried your file a decade ago." Olivia's chest tightened. Her hands were still dripping water onto the tile floor, but she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear, to do what she'd been doing for the last 3 years and fade into the background until this moment passed. But it wouldn't pass. Not this time. Slowly, she dried her hands on a paper towel, turned to face him, and returned the salute. Her movements were automatic, muscle memory from a life she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it had never been real. "Commander Hale," she said quietly. Hale lowered his hand, but his expression didn't change. He looked like a man staring at a corpse that had just sat up and started talking. "How?" he asked. Olivia didn't answer. She couldn't, not here, not in front of Lansing and the trauma team and the dozen other staff members who were now watching this exchange with growing confusion. Instead, she glanced toward the ceiling, where the helicopter rotors were still hammering the night sky. "You brought a Blackhawk to a civilian hospital," she said. "That's not for Shaw." "No," Hale agreed. It's for you. Lansing stepped forward, his confusion hardening into anger. Excuse me, but what the hell is going on? Reed's been working here for 3 years. She's a nurse, not... She's not a nurse, Hale cut in. His voice was flat, final. She's a ghost. The words hung in the air like smoke. Olivia felt every eye in the room turn toward her, felt the weight of questions she couldn't answer pressing down on her shoulders. She wanted to explain, to tell them this was all a mistake, that she wasn't whoever Hale thought she was. But that would be a lie. And she was so goddamn tired of lying. Hale gestured toward the door. We need to talk. Now. Olivia hesitated. Shaw was stable, but barely. Ranger was calm, but only because she'd given him a command he recognized. If she left now, if she walked out of this trauma bay with Hale and his team, she'd be confirming everything they suspected. There'd be no going back. But if she stayed, Hale would drag her out anyway. And that would be worse. She glanced at Lansing. Shaw needs monitoring. His lungs fragile. If his O2 drops below 90, page surgery immediately. Lansing stared at her like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. Reed, don't let Ranger leave his side, she continued. He'll stay calm as long as Shaw's stable. If Shaw crashes, the dog will know before your monitors do. She turned and walked toward Hale without waiting for a response. The commander fell into step beside her, his officers forming a loose perimeter around them as they moved through the hallway. Hospital staff pressed themselves against the walls, staring openly now, their whispers following Olivia like a shadow. They took the stairs instead of the elevator, climbing 3 flights in silence. When they reached the roof access, Hale pushed open the door, and cold night air hit Olivia's face like a slap. The Black Hawk sat in the center of the helipad, rotors still spinning, its crew chief watching them approach with expressionless eyes. Hale stopped at the edge of the pad and turned to face her. I need to know how you're alive, he said. Olivia looked past him at the helicopter, at the city lights sprawling below them, at the life she'd built crumbling in real time. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, she said. Try me. She exhaled slowly. Shadow protocol. Hale's expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but something close to it. Recognition. Horror. That operation was scrubbed, he said. Everyone involved was declared KYA. The files were sealed. The unit disbanded. The files were buried, Olivia corrected. There's a difference. Hale stared at her. How many survived? Just me? The words came out flat, emotionless, but something flickered behind Olivia's eyes, something raw and old and still bleeding. Hale caught it. He'd been a commander long enough to recognize survivors' guilt when he saw it. What happened out there? He asked. Olivia shook her head. You don't have clearance for that conversation. The hell I don't. I'm the one who signed off on your unit's burial. Then you already know what happened. She met his gaze. Someone sold us out. We walked into a kill zone with perfect intel and came out in body bags. I survived because I got lucky. A civilian doctor pulled me out of the rubble before the cleanup crews arrived. An admiral I'd never met showed up 2 days later, told me I was dead, and gave me a new name. Hale's jaw tightened. Who was the admiral? Dead, Olivia said. Heart attack, 6 months after he relocated me. Convenient timing. The implication hung between them. Hale didn't argue. He'd been in the military long enough to know how these things worked. When operations went sideways and people needed to disappear, the cleaners didn't leave loose ends. Why nursing? He asked. Olivia glanced back toward the hospital. Through the roof access door, she could still hear the muted chaos of the emergency department. Alarms, voices, the endless mechanical rhythm of life support machines. I got tired of watching people die, she said. Figured I'd try saving them instead. Hale was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if something had just clicked into place. Shaw wasn't part of a training accident, he said. He was on recon in the Baltic. Someone hit his team with precision fire, same MO as Shadow Protocol. Olivia's blood went cold. You think it's the same people? I think whoever buried your unit is still active, and I think Shaw saw something they don't want getting out. Before Olivia could respond, the roof access door slammed open. A man in a dark suit stepped onto the helipad, flanked by 2 federal agents. He was mid-40s, clean-shaven, with the kind of bland, forgettable face that screamed intelligence oversight. His ID badge read, Miles Carver, DOD Inspector General's Office. He walked straight toward Olivia, ignoring Hale entirely. "Olivia Reed," he said. Not a question, a statement. Or should I say Lieutenant Sarah Bennett, formerly of Shadow Protocol? Olivia's stomach dropped. Hale's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but Carver raised a placating hand. "Relax, Commander. I'm not here to arrest anyone." He turned his attention back to Olivia. "I'm here because you just exposed yourself in front of a dozen witnesses. That dog you controlled downstairs? Ranger's handler died 3 weeks ago in the same operation that nearly killed Shaw. Nobody's been able to get near that animal since. Nobody except you." Olivia said nothing. Carver smiled, thin and cold. "You used a command sequence that's been classified for 8 years. A sequence only Shadow Protocol operatives would know. So either you're a very well-informed civilian, or you're a ghost who just made a very stupid mistake." "She saved a man's life," Hale cut in. "She compromised operational security," Carver corrected. "And now we have a problem." Olivia's hands clenched into fists. She'd known this was coming the moment she'd opened her mouth in that trauma bay. She'd known, and she'd done it anyway, because watching Shaw die on that gurney would have been worse than any consequence Carver could throw at her. "What do you want?" she asked. Carver pulled a tablet from his jacket and swiped through several screens. Security footage appeared, grainy, time-stamped, showing Olivia kneeling beside Ranger in the trauma bay. He replayed the moment she'd spoken those 6 words, then froze the frame. "I want to know who trained you," he said. "I want to know who else survived Shadow Protocol. And I want to know why someone's been running Black Ops under a dead unit's signature for the last 10 years. Olivia stared at the screen, at her own face, caught in fluorescent light, speaking words she should have taken to her grave. "I was the only one," she said. "Everyone else died." "Then explain this." Carver swiped again. A new video appeared, this one from a body cam, judging by the angle. It showed a firefight in some nameless desert, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness. In the center of the frame, 3 figures moved with mechanical precision, clearing a building room by room. Their faces were obscured by balaclavas, but their movements, fluid, coordinated, lethal, were unmistakable. Shadow Protocol tactics. Olivia's breath caught. "When was this?" 4 months ago, Yemen. Carver's voice was ice. "So either you're lying about being the only survivor, or someone's stolen your unit's playbook." Hale stepped between them. "This conversation's over. Reed's under my protection until—" "She's not under anyone's protection," Carver interrupted. "She's evidence, and if she doesn't cooperate, I'll have her detained as a person of interest in an ongoing investigation." Olivia's mind raced. If Carver was telling the truth, if someone really was running operations using Shadow Protocol's methods, then the people who'd buried her unit were still active, still killing, still covering their tracks, and they'd just been handed her location on a silver platter. She looked at Hale. "Shaw. Where's he now?" "Still in trauma. Why?" "Because if Carver found me this fast, so did they." She turned back toward the roof access. "We need to move him. Now." Carver blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere until—" The explosion cut him off. It wasn't loud, not a bomb, just a controlled breach, but the shockwave rolled across the roof like a physical thing. Somewhere below them, on one of the hospital's lower floors, glass shattered and alarms began screaming. Hale's radio crackled to life, voices overlapping in panicked bursts. "Shots fired, 3rd floor. Armed intruders in the west stairwell. Multiple hostiles. They're heading for ICU." Oh. Olivia didn't wait. She shoved past Carver and sprinted for the roof access, Hale right behind her. They hit the stairwell at a dead run, taking the steps 3 at a time. Behind them, Carver was shouting orders into his radio, but Olivia wasn't listening. She knew exactly what was happening. Shaw had seen something worth killing for. And now they'd come to finish the job. They hit the 3rd floor landing at full speed, and Olivia slammed through the door into a hallway that smelled like gunpowder and panic. 2 security guards lay slumped against the wall, unconscious but breathing. Their radios were smashed, their weapons gone. Whoever had breached the hospital wasn't here to make noise. They were here to erase a problem quietly. Hale drew his sidearm and moved past her, checking corners with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "How many?" "Enough to get past hospital security without triggering a full lockdown." Olivia scanned the hallway. Empty gurneys, abandoned medication carts. A nurse's station with the phones ripped out of the wall. They knew exactly when to hit us. Inside job? Or someone's been tracking Shaw since he landed. She started moving toward ICU, staying low, keeping to the wall. Either way, we're about 30 seconds behind them. They rounded the corner and nearly ran straight into Danny Park. The resident was pressed against the wall outside the ICU doors, his face pale, his hands shaking. When he saw Olivia, relief and confusion crashed together in his expression. "Reed, Jesus Christ, there are men with guns." "I know. Where's Shaw?" "ICU 3. They moved him 20 minutes ago." Danny's voice cracked. "Lansing's still in there. He wouldn't leave." Olivia's chest tightened. Of course Lansing wouldn't leave. The stubborn bastard probably thought he could reason with armed intruders by reminding them this was a hospital. She grabbed Danny by the shoulder. "Get everyone off this floor. Use the east stairwell. Move them to the cafeteria. And lock the doors. Don't stop for anyone." "What about you?" "I'm getting Shaw out." Danny stared at her like she'd just announced she was going to fly off the roof. "You're a nurse. Move," Hale cut in, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." Danny moved. Olivia reached the ICU doors and pressed herself against the wall, listening. Inside, she could hear voices, low, controlled, professional. Not panicked hospital staff. These were operators. At least 3, maybe 4. She glanced at Hale. "You got backup coming?" 4 minutes out. He checked his magazine. "We wait. We risk Shaw dying. We go in, we're outnumbered. Then we even the odds." Olivia pushed through the doors before he could stop her. The ICU was dim, lit only by the glow of monitors and the emergency exit signs. 3 men in tactical gear stood near the nurse's station, their rifles trained on the hallway leading to the patient rooms. They wore balaclavas and carried suppressed weapons. Nothing about them screamed military. They looked more like contractors, expensive ones. One of them turned when Olivia entered, his rifle swinging toward her chest. She raised her hands slowly, palms out, posture non-threatening, just a scared nurse stumbling into the wrong place at the wrong time. "Don't shoot," she said. Her voice came out shaky, breathless. "Perfect. Please, I'm just trying to find my patients." "Get out!" the nearest operative snapped. His voice was flat, American, trained. "Now!" Olivia took a step back, playing the part. Scared, compliant, harmless. Behind her, Hale slipped through the door like smoke, positioning himself behind a supply cart. The operatives hadn't seen him yet. Their attention was locked on Olivia, which was exactly what she needed. "Is anyone hurt?" she asked, letting her voice rise just enough to sound panicked. "I heard gunfire. Lady, if you don't turn around in 3 seconds, you're going to be hurt." Olivia's hands were still raised, but her weight had shifted slightly onto the balls of her feet. Muscle memory. The operative closest to her noticed the change a half-second too late. She dropped low, grabbed his rifle barrel, and twisted hard. The weapon discharged into the ceiling tiles as she drove her elbow into his throat. He went down choking. The second operative swung his rifle toward her, but Hale was faster. 2 shots, center mass, controlled, and the man collapsed. The third operative spun toward Hale, and Olivia kicked a metal tray cart into his legs. He stumbled. Hale put him down with a headshot before he could recover. The entire exchange took maybe 8 seconds. Olivia straightened, breathing hard, and looked at Hale. He was staring at her with an expression that was part respect, part disbelief. "You're not a nurse," he said. "Not right now, I'm not." She stepped over the unconscious operative and moved toward the patient rooms. "Shaw?" "ICU 3, a voice called from down the hall. Olivia turned. Dr. Lansing stood in the doorway of one of the patient rooms, his face ashen, his hands raised. Behind him, another operative had a pistol pressed to his spine. This one wasn't wearing a mask. He was older, late 40s maybe, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw and eyes that were too calm for someone standing in the middle of a gunfight. "Lieutenant Reed," the man said. His voice was smooth, almost pleasant. "Or do you prefer Olivia now?" Olivia went still. Hale raised his weapon, but the operative shook his head. "Lower it, Commander, or the doctor dies." Hale didn't lower his weapon. "You're already dead. Backup's 90 seconds out." "Then we'd better talk fast." The operative pressed the pistol harder against Lansing's back. "I'm here for Shaw. You give him to me. I walk away." Everyone lives. Not happening, Olivia said. The operative smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. He glanced past her toward the trauma bay where Shaw was being monitored. You know, it's funny. We spent 10 years looking for Shadow Protocol survivors. Never thought we'd find one hiding in scrubs. Olivia's blood turned to ice. Who sent you? Someone who doesn't appreciate ghosts coming back to life. He tilted his head. Shaw saw something in the Baltic. Something that connects back to the operation that killed your unit. You let him wake up, he talks, and a lot of very powerful people start losing sleep. Then they should have thought about that before they sold us out. Sold you out? The operative laughed, low and bitter. Is that what you think happened? Lieutenant, your unit wasn't betrayed. It was bait. The words hit Olivia like a physical blow. Hale's expression didn't change, but his grip on his weapon tightened. Bullshit, Olivia said. Shadow Protocol was designed to fail, the operative continued. Your team was sent into that desert to draw out a weapons network we'd been tracking for 2 years. We needed them to commit resources, to expose their command structure. You were the tripwire. You're lying, am I? He gestured toward the trauma bay. Shaw's team ran into the same network last month. They were getting too close, asking too many questions. So we fed them bad intel, sent them into a kill zone, and cleaned up the mess. Same playbook, same results. Olivia's hands were shaking now, rage and grief crashing together in her chest. My unit died because you used them as bait? Your unit died because that's what soldiers do. The operative's voice was matter-of-fact, almost bored. You just had the bad luck to survive. Hale fired. The shot went wide, intentionally, shattering a monitor behind the operative's head. The man flinched, and Lansing threw himself sideways. Olivia was already moving. She covered the distance in 3 strides, grabbed the operative's gun hand, and slammed it against the doorframe. The pistol clattered to the floor. The operative drove his knee toward her ribs, but she twisted, redirected the momentum, and put him face first into the wall. He came up swinging, fast, trained. His fist caught her jaw and her vision blurred. She tasted blood. He reached for a knife on his belt, but Hale tackled him from behind, driving him to the ground. They grappled for the blade, grunting, gasping, and then the operative's body went limp. Hale stood, breathing hard, the knife buried in the operative's chest. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lansing scrambled to his feet, staring at the body like it might suddenly come back to life. What the hell is going on? He demanded. His voice was hoarse, shaking. Reed! Who are you? Olivia didn't answer. She was already moving toward ICU 3, where Shaw was hooked up to a ventilator and half a dozen monitors. Ranger lay on the floor beside the bed, ears pinned back, growling low. When Olivia entered, the dog's growl cut off, and his tail gave a single cautious wag. Shaw's eyes were open. Not fully conscious, his pupils were blown from the sedatives, but aware enough to track movement. When he saw Olivia, something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Or maybe just confusion. It was hard to tell. She moved to his bedside, checking his vitals. Heart rate elevated but stable. Blood pressure holding. Oxygen saturation at 94%. Not great, but alive. Shaw, she said quietly. Can you hear me? His eyes focused on her face. His mouth moved, but the ventilator tube made speech impossible. Olivia glanced at the equipment, then at Hale, who'd followed her into the room. He's stable enough to extubate, she said. But if we pull the tube, he's vulnerable. No airway protection. Can he talk? Maybe, for a few minutes. Hale glanced toward the hallway, where the sound of sirens was growing louder. Backup was close now. Do it. Olivia hesitated. Extubating a patient this soon after trauma surgery was dangerous. If Shaw's airway swelled, if he aspirated, if his lung collapsed again, he'd die before they could reintubate. But if he stayed sedated, if he never woke up, the people who'd sent those operatives would try again, and next time they wouldn't send contractors. They'd send someone who wouldn't miss. She made the call. Working quickly, she deflated the cuff on the endotracheal tube and pulled it free. Shaw coughed violently, his body convulsing, and Ranger was on his feet immediately, pressing his nose against Shaw's hand. The contact seemed to calm him. His coughing subsided. He sucked in air through his raw throat, each breath sounding like sandpaper on wood. Shaw, Hale said, leaning over the bed. Who hit your team in the Baltic? Shaw's eyes were watering, but he forced himself to focus. Didn't See faces. His voice was barely a whisper, wrecked. But the tactics, shadow protocol. Olivia's stomach dropped. You're sure? Shaw nodded weakly. I was there, 10 years ago. Recon support for your unit. The room went silent. Olivia stared at him, her mind racing. Shaw had been in the desert. He'd seen Shadow Protocol operate before the ambush. I watched you, Shaw continued, each word a struggle. Watched your team move through that compound. Textbook infiltration. Then everything went to hell. What did you see? Hale demanded. Shaw's breathing was getting labored. Olivia checked his oxygen saturation. It was dropping. 92%. 90%. She grabbed an oxygen mask and fitted it over his face, cranking the flow to maximum. Take your time, she said. Shaw sucked in oxygen greedily, then pushed the mask aside. After the explosion, I stayed hidden. Watched the cleanup crew. They weren't collecting bodies, they were executing survivors. Olivia's hands went cold. How many? 3. Maybe 4. Shaw's eyes locked on hers. I saw one of them. Use your call sign. Bennett. He was wearing your gear, your unit patch. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Olivia's feet. Someone had stolen her identity, worn her insignia, used her team's tactics to run black ops for a decade while the real Shadow Protocol rotted in unmarked graves. Who? She asked. Her voice came out flat, dead. Did you see his face? Shaw shook his head. Masked, but I heard a name. Kessler. Hale went rigid. Captain Nathan Kessler? You know him? Olivia asked. He was your unit's liaison officer, Hale said slowly. He coordinated intel for Shadow Protocol. Went missing 3 days before your op went sideways. We assumed he'd been compromised. He wasn't compromised, Olivia said. He was the one running the ambush. The pieces were falling into place now, ugly and inevitable. Kessler had access to everything. Mission parameters, deployment schedules, extraction routes. He could have fed the network every detail they needed to set the trap. And after Shadow Protocol was wiped out, he'd stepped into the void, using their methods, their reputation, to run operations off the books. Where is he now? She asked. Hale pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. Last known location was... Shit. He's listed as KIA. Died in a helicopter crash 6 months after your unit was buried. Convenient, Olivia said. Let me guess. No body recovered? Hale's expression was grim. Just dental records. Matched perfectly. Because he wanted to disappear. Olivia turned back to Shaw. You said he's still active. Where? Shaw was fading now, his eyelids drooping. The sedatives were pulling him back under. Baltic? Station? Offshore? His voice trailed off. His head lolled to the side. Olivia checked his vitals. Oxygen saturation climbing back to 94%. Heart rate stabilizing. He'd be out for hours now. She looked at Hale. We need to find that station. Even if we do, we've got no jurisdiction. This is international waters, shadow ops, buried files. Then we unbury them. Olivia's voice was hard. Shaw just confirmed that someone's been using my unit's name to run illegal operations for 10 years. That's not shadow ops, that's treason. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, multiple. Hale raised his weapon, then lowered it when Commander Rowe and 6 MPs stormed into the ICU, rifles up, scanning for threats. When Rowe saw the bodies in the hallway, his expression darkened. Sit rep, he barked. 4 hostiles down, 1 civilian injured, Shaw stable, Hale reported. We've got a bigger problem. Rowe listened as Hale explained what Shaw had revealed. With each sentence, Rowe's jaw tightened. When Hale finished, Rowe was silent for a long moment. You're telling me Shadow Protocol's been active for 10 years? He said finally. A stolen version of it, Olivia corrected. Run by someone who wants us to think the unit's still buried. Rowe turned to her. And you're the proof they missed. Yeah. That makes you a target. I know. Rowe exhaled slowly, thinking. Then he pulled out his radio and spoke quickly, issuing orders. Within minutes, the ICU was swarming with MPs. Shaw was moved to a secure room under armed guard. Ranger stayed with him, a silent sentinel. The hospital was locked down, every entrance covered, every visitor screened, but Olivia knew it wouldn't be enough. If Kessler was alive, if he was running operations under Shadow Protocol's banner, he wouldn't stop until every loose end was tied off. Shaw was one loose end, Olivia was another, and loose ends didn't survive long in this world. She found Hale in the hallway outside Shaw's room, arguing quietly with Miles Carver. The DoD inspector had arrived with a team of federal agents and was demanding custody of Shaw for questioning. Hale was refusing. "He's a military asset under my command," Hale said. "You want access, you go through proper channels." "Proper channels take time," Carver shot back. "Time we don't have. If Kessler's running a rogue unit, then we handle it," Hale cut in. "Not you." Carver's expression went cold. "You don't have the authority." "I have enough." Hale's voice was ice. "This is a military matter. Stay in your lane." Carver's jaw worked, but he didn't push. Instead, he turned to Olivia. "You knew Kessler," he said. "What can you tell me about him?" Olivia thought back to the last time she'd seen Nathan Kessler. It had been 3 days before the ambush. He'd been calm, professional, giving her team their final briefing. Nothing in his demeanor had suggested betrayal. Nothing had screamed warning. "He was smart," she said finally. "Methodical. Good at reading people. If he's been running ops for 10 years without getting caught, he's better than I thought." "Weaknesses?" "He trusted hierarchy, believed in chain of command." She paused. "And he hated loose ends." Carver's eyes narrowed. Meaning if he finds out I'm alive, he'll come for me himself." The hallway went quiet. Hale and Carver exchanged a look, and Olivia realized what they were thinking before either of them said it. "No," she said. "Hear me out," Hale started. "Absolutely not. Reed, if Kessler thinks you're a threat, then I am a threat," she cut in. "I'm not playing bait." "You already are," Carver said quietly. "The moment you exposed yourself in that trauma bay, you put yourself on Kessler's radar. He knows you survived. He knows you're here, and he knows you can identify him." Olivia wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Carver was right. She'd already painted a target on her back. The only question now was whether she'd wait for Kessler to come to her, or if she'd go to him first. "What's your plan?" she asked. Carver pulled out a tablet and brought up a satellite image. It showed a dark expanse of ocean with a single structure, a drilling platform maybe, or a decommissioned oil rig, sitting in the middle of nowhere. "This is the Baltic station Shaw mentioned," Carver said. "Officially, it's abandoned. Unofficially, it's been pinging encrypted comms for the last 6 months. We think it's Kessler's base of operations." "You think, or you know?" "We know someone's there, we just don't know who." Carver swiped to another image, this one showing thermal signatures inside the structure. At least a dozen bodies. Could be contractors, could be Kessler, could be nothing. "Or it could be a trap," Olivia said. "That's why we're sending a reconnaissance team first." Carver looked at her. "And that's why we need someone who knows Shadow Protocol tactics. Someone who can identify Kessler on sight." Olivia shook her head. "I've been out of the field for 10 years. I'm not—" "You took down 4 operatives in under 10 seconds, Hale interrupted. "You're still in the field. You just forgot for a while." Olivia wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because Hale was right. The moment she'd moved in that ICU, the moment she'd grabbed that rifle and put that operative down, she'd stopped being Olivia Reed, civilian nurse. She'd become Lieutenant Sarah Bennett again. And Bennett didn't run from fights. "When do we leave?" she asked. 6 hours, Carver said. "Wheels up at 0400. We'll brief en route." Olivia nodded slowly. 6 hours. Enough time to say goodbye to a life she'd built on lies. Enough time to accept that the ghost she'd buried was about to claw its way back to the surface. She turned to leave, but Hale caught her arm. "Reed," he said, "you don't have to do this." "Yeah," she said, "I do." Because somewhere out there, Nathan Kessler was wearing her unit's name like a mask. He was using their tactics to kill people, to run operations that served no country and answered to no command. And every person who died under that stolen banner was another weight on Olivia's shoulders. Shadow Protocol had been buried for 10 years. It was time to dig it back up. Olivia left the hospital at 200, slipping out through a side entrance while MPs maintained watch on the main doors. She didn't go home. Home was a tiny apartment 3 blocks away, and if Kessler had people watching the hospital, they'd already have her address. Instead, she walked to a 24-hour diner on 5th Street and ordered coffee she didn't drink. The place was empty except for a waitress who looked half asleep and a trucker nursing a plate of eggs. Olivia sat in a corner booth with her back to the wall and stared at her reflection in the window. She looked like hell. Bruise forming on her jaw, blood on her collar, eyes hollow from too many years of running. She wondered what her team would think if they could see her now. Captain Miranda Wells, who taught her how to breach a door without making noise. Sergeant First Class David Ortega, who'd always had a joke ready even in the middle of firefights. Corporal Lena Hayes, who'd saved Olivia's life twice and never asked for thanks. All of them dead because Nathan Kessler had decided they were expendable. Olivia's hands curled into fists on the table. She'd spent 10 years hiding, 10 years pretending the past didn't exist, 10 years telling herself she'd done everything she could. But she hadn't. She'd survived while her team died. And instead of hunting down the people responsible, she'd put on scrubs and disappeared. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed. A text from Hale. Wheels up in 90 minutes. Transport's outside. Olivia left cash on the table and walked out into the cold pre-dawn air. A black SUV idled at the curb, its windows tinted, its engine purring. She climbed into the back seat and found Hale waiting for her, along with 2 other operators she didn't recognize. "Reed," Hale said, "meet your team." The first operator was a woman in her late 20s, compact and lean, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She nodded at Olivia but didn't offer her hand. "Captain Reese Mallory," she said. "I'll be running point on the recon." The second operator was older, mid-30s maybe, with a scar running across his knuckles and eyes that had seen too much. "Lieutenant Jason Grant, Demolitions." Olivia studied them both. Professional, experienced, but not shadow protocol. They wouldn't understand the tactics Kessler was using, wouldn't recognize the patterns. If things went sideways, they'd be operating blind. "How much do they know?" she asked Hale. "Everything Shaw told us, nothing about you." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "You didn't tell them I'm shadow protocol?" "I told them you're a consultant with specialized knowledge." Hale's expression was unreadable. "What you tell them is your call." The SUV pulled away from the curb and headed toward the airfield. Olivia leaned back in her seat, exhaustion pressing down on her like a weight. She'd been awake for 22 hours straight. Her body ached. Her jaw throbbed. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded like Captain Wells was asking her what the hell she thought she was doing. "Getting justice," she answered silently. Finally. They reached the airfield 40 minutes later. A C-130 sat on the tarmac, engines warming up, cargo ramp lowered. Carver was waiting near the entrance, flanked by 2 agents. When he saw Olivia, he gestured her over. "Change of plans," he said. Olivia's stomach sank. What kind of change? "Kessler knows you're coming." The words hit her like a gut punch. "How? Someone leaked the op." Carver's expression was grim. "We've got a mole in the command structure. Kessler received intel about the recon team 30 minutes ago." Olivia's mind raced. If Kessler knew they were coming, the entire operation was compromised. The Baltic station would be fortified, ambush points established, escape routes cut off. It would be Shadow Protocol's final mission all over again. "We abort," she said. "We can't." Carver pulled up another image on his tablet, this one showing a convoy of vehicles leaving the Baltic station. "Kessler's evacuating. If we don't hit him now, he disappears for good." Olivia stared at the image. Kessler was running, which meant he was scared, and scared people made mistakes. "Then we change the approach," she said. "He's expecting a recon team. We give him something else." "Like what?" Olivia met Carver's eyes. "He wants me. So let's give him what he wants." Carver stared at her like she'd just volunteered to walk into a wood chipper. "You want to use yourself as bait." "Not bait," Olivia corrected. "Leverage. Kessler thinks I'm a threat because I can identify him. But I'm also the only person alive who knows how Shadow Protocol operated from the inside. That makes me valuable. Or it makes you a liability he'll shoot on sight. He would have done that already if that's what he wanted." Olivia gestured toward the tablet showing Kessler's convoy. "He's evacuating, which means he's consolidating, moving assets, burning evidence, preparing for something bigger. He won't kill me until he knows what I've told you." Hale stepped forward, his expression dark. This is a bad idea. It's the only idea, Olivia shot back. You send a team in blind, Kessler picks them apart. He knows your tactics. He trained with your people. But he doesn't know mine anymore. Because you've been playing nurse for 10 years. The word stung, but Olivia didn't flinch. Yeah, and that's exactly why he'll underestimate me. Carver and Hale exchanged a look, the kind of look that said they both knew she was right and hated it. Finally, Carver exhaled slowly. If we do this, you're wired. Audio and GPS tracking. The moment things go sideways, we extract. Fine. And you follow the rules of engagement. No heroics, no revenge plays. Olivia met his eyes. I'm not here for revenge. Then what are you here for? Answers. She turned toward the C-130. Let's move. The flight to the Baltic took 4 hours. Olivia spent most of it in silence, sitting in the cargo hold while Mallory and Grant reviewed tactical maps and Hale coordinated with command. The interior of the plane was freezing, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and stayed there. Olivia pulled a borrowed jacket tighter around her shoulders and tried not to think about the last time she'd been on a military transport, 10 years ago. Headed into the desert. Captain Wells had been sitting across from her, cleaning her rifle with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. Ortega had been making jokes about the in-flight meal, MRS that tasted like cardboard soaked in regret. Hayes had been reading a book, something about philosophy that Olivia never understood. They'd all been so alive, now they were ash. You okay? Mallory's voice cut through the noise of the engines. She'd moved to sit beside Olivia, her expression curious but not unkind. Yeah. You don't look okay. Olivia didn't answer. Mallory studied her for a moment, then leaned back against the cargo netting. Hale said you used to run with an elite unit, Mallory said. Didn't say which one. He wouldn't. Shadow protocol, right? Olivia's head snapped toward her. Mallory raised her hands. Relax, I'm not digging. She hesitated. I heard stories about a unit that operated in places we weren't supposed to be, doing things we weren't supposed to do. They say the whole team got wiped out in an ambush. They're right. Except you. Olivia looked away. Except me. Mallory was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That why you're doing this? Survivor's guilt? I'm doing this because someone's wearing my team's name like a costume, Olivia said. Her voice was flat, controlled. And every op they run under that name is another insult to the people who died. Mallory nodded slowly. Fair enough. She stood and moved back toward Grant, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts. The plane began its descent 20 minutes later. They weren't landing, the Baltic station didn't have a runway, but they were getting close enough for the insertion team to fast rope down. Olivia moved to the cargo ramp as it began to lower, cold air screaming into the hold. Below, the ocean stretched out like black glass, broken only by the silhouette of the station. It was bigger than the satellite images had suggested. 3 interconnected platforms connected by narrow walkways, with a central drilling tower rising maybe 100 feet into the air. Lights burned in several windows, but most of the structure was dark. No visible guards, no obvious defenses, which meant the defenses were very good. Grant handed Olivia a tactical vest with a wire running down her spine. GPS trackers in the lining, audio feeds in the collar. Don't take it off. Wasn't planning to. And take this. He handed her a compact pistol, a Glock 19, suppressed. 15 rounds. Make them count. Olivia checked the chamber, verified the magazine, and tucked it into her waistband. It felt wrong, too light, too small. Shadow Protocol had used heavier weapons, rifles, breaching charges, enough firepower to level a building if needed. But those days were gone. Now she was working with what she had. The helicopter, a Black Hawk, different from the one that had landed at the hospital, hovered 50 feet above the station's main platform. Ropes dropped from the side doors. Mallory went first, descending in smooth, controlled bursts. Grant followed. Then Olivia. Her hands remembered the motion even if her muscles didn't. Grip, slide, brake, repeat. She hit the platform hard, her knees absorbing the impact, and rolled to the side as the rope retracted. The Black Hawk peeled away, rotors fading into the distance, and suddenly the night was very quiet. Too quiet. Mallory signaled for them to move. They crossed the platform in a tight formation, weapons up, scanning for threats. The metal grating beneath their feet was slick with salt spray. Every step echoed. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest, adrenaline sharpening her senses. They reached the entrance to the main structure, a heavy steel door with a keypad lock. Grant pulled a bypass kit from his vest and got to work. 30 seconds later, the lock clicked open. Mallory pushed through first, her rifle sweeping the interior. Nothing. The hallway beyond was narrow, lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Old wiring, cheap construction. This place had been a legitimate drilling platform once, probably decommissioned in the 90s and left to rot. Now it was something else. A ghost station. A place that didn't exist on any map. Perfect for running black ops. They moved deeper into the structure, clearing rooms as they went. Storage closets, maintenance spaces, an old break room with a coffee maker that still smelled faintly of burnt grounds. No people, no equipment, nothing that suggested this place was operational. "This doesn't feel right," Grant muttered. Olivia agreed. If Kessler was evacuating, there should have been signs. Burn bags, wiped hard drives, discarded gear, but everything here looked untouched, abandoned, or staged. Mallory stopped at an intersection and held up a fist. Everyone froze. She pointed down the left corridor where a faint glow spilled from an open doorway. Voices. Low, controlled, professional. They moved toward the sound, weapons ready. Olivia's grip on the Glock tightened. Her breathing was steady, but her pulse was racing. This was it. Kessler was through that door. She could feel it. Mallory reached the doorway first and glanced inside. Her expression shifted. Surprise, confusion, and then she stepped through. Olivia followed. The room was some kind of operations center. Banks of monitors lined the walls, most of them dark. A conference table dominated the center, covered in maps and satellite images. And standing at the far end, arms crossed, was a man Olivia hadn't seen in 10 years. Nathan Kessler looked older, grayer, harder, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, utterly devoid of doubt. He wore civilian clothes, not tactical gear, and his hands were empty. No weapon visible, no backup, just him. "Lieutenant Bennett," he said. His voice was smooth, almost pleasant. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Mallory's rifle snapped toward him. "Hands where I can see them." Kessler complied, raising his hands slowly. "Relax, Captain. I'm not armed." "Doesn't mean you're not dangerous," Grant said. "True." Kessler's gaze shifted to Olivia. "You look different. The blonde hair suits you." Olivia didn't respond. She was scanning the room, looking for threats. No guards, no backup. Just Kessler and a lot of empty space. This was a trap. "Where's your team?" she asked. "Gone. I sent them ahead." Kessler gestured toward the monitors. "I stayed behind to tie up loose ends." "Loose ends like me?" "Loose ends like the truth." He lowered his hands slowly, moving to the conference table. Mallory tracked him with her rifle, but he ignored her. He picked up a tablet and tapped the screen. One of the monitors flickered to life, showing footage of a desert compound. Night vision, grainy, but unmistakable. Shadow Protocol's final mission. Olivia's breath caught. On the screen she could see her team moving through the compound. Wells on point, Ortega covering the rear, Hayes breaching doors. And there, in the center of the formation, was a younger version of herself, focused, alive, unaware that she had 20 minutes left before everything went to hell. "I didn't betray you," Kessler said quietly. "I saved you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Olivia tore her eyes away from the screen and stared at him. "Bullshit." "Is it?" Kessler swiped to another video. This one showed the ambush, explosions, gunfire, bodies falling. Olivia watched herself get thrown by a blast, her body crumpling against a wall. The screen went dark. "You were supposed to die," Kessler continued. "All of you. Shadow Protocol was a burn unit. Expendable assets sent into a meat grinder to draw out a network we couldn't touch through official channels." "You're lying." "I'm not." Kessler pulled up another file, classified documents marked with clearances Olivia didn't recognize. "Your orders came from the top. Joint Chiefs, Secretary of Defense, people who needed plausible deniability. Shadow Protocol was their scapegoat." Olivia's hands were shaking now. She wanted to call him a liar, to put a bullet in his chest and walk away. But the documents on the screen looked real. The signatures looked real. "Then why am I alive?" she demanded. "Because I pulled you out." Kessler's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "I was supposed to confirm your deaths and file the reports. But when I saw you breathing in that rubble, I made a choice. I got you to a civilian hospital, called in a favor with an admiral I trusted, and buried your file so deep nobody would ever find it." "And then you stole my unit's identity," Olivia said. Her voice was ice. "You used Shadow Protocol's tactics to run black ops for 10 years. I used them to finish what your team started." Kessler's expression hardened. "The network that killed your people is still operational, still trafficking weapons, funding terror cells, destabilizing entire regions. I've spent the last decade dismantling it piece by piece. Every operation I ran under Shadow Protocol's name brought me closer to the people who sent you into that desert." "Then why the secrecy?" Mallory cut in. "Why not go through official channels?" "Because the people who gave those orders are still in power," Kessler said. "They're untouchable. Generals, politicians, men who hide behind classified files and executive privilege. If I'd gone public, they would have buried me the same way they buried Shadow Protocol." Olivia's mind was racing. Everything Kessler was saying contradicted what she'd believed for 10 years, but it also fit the pieces she'd been trying to ignore. The way her unit had been sent into that operation with minimal support. The way their intel had been too perfect, too detailed. The way nobody had questioned the official story. "Prove it," she said. Kessler tapped the tablet again. Another file appeared, this one showing bank records, communications logs, names Olivia recognized from the news. Senators, 4-star generals, CEOs of defense contractors. "These are the people who profited from Shadow Protocol's destruction," Kessler said. "They fed your team to the wolves, then cashed in on the chaos. I've been building a case against them for a decade, and now, thanks to Shaw surviving that ambush in the Baltic, I finally have enough evidence to bring them down." Olivia stared at the screen, at the names, at the proof, and something cold and terrible settled in her chest. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Because I need your help." Kessler met her eyes. "Shaw's testimony isn't enough. I need someone who was there, someone who can confirm what Shadow Protocol was really sent to do. You want me to testify. I want you to help me burn the people who killed your team." The room went silent. Mallory and Grant exchanged glances. Hale's voice crackled over the comms, demanding a sitrep. Olivia ignored all of it. She was staring at Kessler, trying to read him, trying to figure out if this was the truth or just another layer of lies. "If what you're saying is true," she said slowly, "why did you send contractors to kill Shaw at the hospital?" Kessler's expression shifted. Confusion, then realization. "I didn't send anyone to the hospital," he said. The words hit Olivia like a punch. "Bullshit. They use Shadow Protocol tactics. Stolen tactics," Kessler interrupted. "The same way I stole them. Lieutenant, I'm not the only one running ops under your unit's name." Olivia's blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" "The network I've been hunting isn't just trafficking weapons," Kessler said. "They're trafficking intelligence, selling classified operations to the highest bidder. Shadow Protocol's playbook has been on the black market for 5 years. Anyone with enough money can buy it." "Then who hit the hospital?" "The same people who want to bury Shaw's testimony." Kessler pulled up another file, this one showing intercepted communications. They knew he saw something in the Baltic. They knew he could tie the network back to the people who ordered Shadow Protocol's execution, so they sent a team to clean up the mess. Olivia's mind reeled. If Kessler was telling the truth, if someone else had sent those contractors, then everything she'd assumed about tonight was wrong. "This is a setup," she said. "Yes," Kessler agreed, "but not by me." As if on cue, the lights went out. The operations center plunged into darkness. Mallory's rifle light snapped on, cutting through the black. Grant moved to the door, checking the hallway. "We've got movement," he said, "multiple contacts converging on our position." Hale's voice exploded over the comms. "Reed, what's your status?" "Compromised," Olivia said. She turned to Kessler. "You said you sent your team ahead. Where?" "Off the station. They evacuated an hour ago." "Then who's out there?" Kessler's expression went grim. "The people who want both of us dead." The first gunshot shattered the silence. It came from somewhere down the hallway, followed by a burst of automatic fire. Grant returned fire, his rifle barking in short, controlled bursts. Mallory moved to cover the opposite door, her rifle tracking movement Olivia couldn't see. "We need to move," Mallory said. "Now." Kessler grabbed the tablet and shoved it into Olivia's hands. "Everything you need is on there. Names, dates, bank records. Get it to the right people." "What about you?" "I'll buy you time." He pulled a pistol from a hidden holster and chambered around. "There's an emergency exit on the east platform. Follow the red markers. You'll hit a boat launch." "You're coming with us," Olivia said. "No." Kessler's voice was final. "They're here for me. If I stay, you might make it out." "Kessler." "Go!" Another burst of gunfire, closer this time. Grant stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. Mallory dragged him toward the door, cursing. "We're leaving," she barked. "Reed, move your ass." Olivia hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to stay, to fight, to finish this. But Kessler was already moving toward the hallway, firing at shadows she couldn't see. If she stayed, they'd all die. If she ran, maybe, they'd survive long enough to get the truth out. She ran. Mallory led the way, half dragging Grant through corridors that all looked the same. The station shook beneath them, explosions maybe, or breaching charges. The walls groaned, metal shrieked. Somewhere behind them, Kessler was fighting a losing battle. They reached the east platform and found the boat launch. A small, rigid inflatable was tied to the dock, bobbing in the dark water. Mallory shoved Grant into the boat and started the engine. It coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. "Get in!" she yelled. Olivia jumped into the boat, clutching the tablet against her chest. Mallory gunned the engine and they shot away from the station, spray soaking them instantly. Behind them, the station lit up like a bonfire. Flames climbed the central tower. More explosions. The entire structure groaned, tilting slowly into the ocean. Olivia watched it burn, her chest tight. Kessler was still in there, along with the proof she needed, along with answers she'd spent 10 years searching for. "He didn't make it," Grant said. His voice was weak, strained. Blood had soaked through his vest. Mallory didn't respond. She just kept driving, the boat skipping across the waves, the station burning smaller and smaller behind them. The Black Hawk found them 20 minutes later. They were hauled aboard, soaking wet, freezing, and Olivia collapsed onto the deck as the helicopter banked hard. A medic went to work on Grant immediately, cutting away his vest, packing the wound. He'd live. Hale knelt beside Olivia. "What happened?" Olivia handed him the tablet. "Kessler gave me this. He said it's proof. Names, records, everything." Hale took the tablet and swiped through the files. His expression went dark. "Jesus Christ. What?" "Half these names are sitting members of Congress." Hale looked up at her. "If this goes public, it has to," Olivia said. "That's the whole point. It'll start a war." "Good." Olivia closed her eyes, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. "Maybe it's time." The helicopter carried them back toward friendly territory, the Baltic station burning itself out behind them. Olivia sat in silence, the tablet clutched in her lap, and thought about Kessler, about whether he'd been telling the truth, about whether it mattered. She'd spent 10 years running from her past, 10 years pretending she was someone else, 10 years hiding. Not anymore. Whoever had killed her team, whoever had sent those contractors to the hospital, they were about to learn that some ghosts didn't stay buried. The helicopter touched down at a NATO airbase just after dawn. Olivia was escorted to a secure briefing room where Carver and a dozen officials she didn't recognize were waiting. Hale handed over the tablet. Carver plugged it into a terminal and brought up the files. The room went silent as people read. Then slowly, faces began to change. Shock, anger, horror. "This can't be real," someone muttered. "It's real," Hale said. "Kessler spent 10 years building this case." "Kessler's dead," Carver said flatly. "The station's gone. Half this evidence is circumstantial at best." "Then we corroborate it," Olivia said. "Shaw's testimony, the files, the operations Kessler ran, it all connects." Carver stared at her. "You realize what you're asking for? If we pursue this, careers will end. Reputations will be destroyed. People will go to prison." "Good." "Reed, they killed my team," Olivia cut in. Her voice was quiet, controlled, but something dangerous flickered behind her eyes. They sent us into that desert knowing we'd die. And when I survived, they tried to bury me too. So yeah, I want them to pay. Every single one of them. Carver was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, he said. We'll open an investigation. Full scope. No limits. Olivia exhaled. It wasn't justice. Not yet. But it was a start. She left the briefing room and walked out into the cold morning air. The base was coming alive. Soldiers running drills, helicopters spinning up. The rhythm of military life that she'd left behind a decade ago. It should have felt foreign, alien. But it didn't. It felt like coming home. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You made a mistake coming after us. Olivia stared at the message. Ice flooded her veins. The number was untraceable, the message vague, but the threat was clear. They knew who she was. They knew what she was doing. And they weren't done. Olivia didn't delete the message. She forwarded it to Carver, then pocketed her phone and walked toward the barracks where they'd assigned her a temporary bunk. Her hands weren't shaking. Her pulse was steady. 10 years ago, a threat like that would have sent her into tactical mode, checking exits, identifying weapons, calculating angles of attack. Now she just felt tired and angry. Someone out there thought they could scare her into silence. They didn't understand that silence was what she'd been doing for a decade. Silence was what had eaten her alive every single day since that desert. She was done being quiet. The barracks were empty when she arrived. She stripped off her wet tactical gear, showered in water that never got warm enough, and changed into borrowed fatigues that didn't fit right. When she emerged, Hale was waiting outside her door. We need to talk, he said. They walked to a secured conference room 3 buildings over. Inside, Carver sat at a table with 2 people Olivia didn't recognize. A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun, and a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and dressed in a suit that cost more than Olivia's annual salary as a nurse. Lieutenant Reed, the woman said. Her voice was crisp, authoritative. I'm Colonel Andrea Voss, Defense Intelligence Agency. This is Deputy Director Marcus Hunt, FBI. Olivia sat across from them without being asked. What's this about? The message you received, Hunt said. He slid a printed copy across the table. We traced it. Burner phone, activated 3 hours ago in Brussels. Deactivated immediately after sending. Whoever sent it knows how to stay invisible. But they made a mistake, Voss added. She pulled up something on her laptop and turned the screen toward Olivia. It showed a series of financial transactions, dozens of them, all routing through shell companies and offshore accounts. The phone was purchased using a credit card linked to one of the accounts Kessler identified in his files. Olivia leaned forward. Whose account? Senator Douglas Mercer. The name hit Olivia like a freight train. She knew Mercer. Everyone did. 3-term senator, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, decorated veteran. He'd built his career on being tough on defense, on supporting the troops, on never backing down from a fight, and apparently on profiting from their deaths. Mercer ordered Shadow Protocol's mission, Voss said. He signed off on the intel, authorized the deployment, and collected kickbacks from the defense contractors who supplied the weapons network your team was sent to disrupt. When the operation went sideways and your unit was wiped out, those same contractors paid him to bury the evidence. Olivia's hands curled into fists on the table. You can prove this? Kessler's files give us a roadmap, Hunt said. But files can be disputed. What we need is testimony. Someone who was there, someone who can connect Mercer to the operation. Shaw, Olivia said. Shaw's still recovering. His testimony alone won't be enough. Hunt's gaze was steady. We need you. Olivia had known this was coming. From the moment she'd stepped off that helicopter with Kessler's tablet, she'd known they'd ask her to testify. To stand in front of cameras and committees and tell the world what had happened in that desert. To relive every moment of the ambush, every face of her dead teammates, every second of the 10 years she'd spent hiding. When? She asked. 72 hours, Voss said. We're convening a closed-door hearing with the Senate Intelligence Committee. Mercer will be there. So will the other names on Kessler's list. And if I testify, what happens to me after? Protective custody, Hunt said. New identity, relocation, full support. Same deal you had before. Olivia shook her head. I'm not running again. Reed. No. Her voice was flat. I spent 10 years being someone else. I'm done hiding. Voss and Hunt exchanged glances. Hale, standing near the door, said nothing. Finally, Voss nodded. All right, but you need to understand what you're walking into. Mercer has resources, allies, people who owe him favors. The moment you testify, he'll come after you with everything he has. Let him try. They spent the next 2 hours going over the evidence. Kessler's files were damning. Bank records showing payments from shell companies to Mercer's personal accounts. Communications logs proving he'd known about the ambush before Shadow Protocol was deployed. Testimony from contractors who'd worked with the weapons network and could tie Mercer directly to its operations. But evidence alone wasn't enough. They needed someone who could humanize the cost. Someone who could stand in front of those senators and make them understand that Shadow Protocol hadn't been an abstract military failure. It had been people, real people, who'd trusted their chain of command and died because of that trust. Olivia was that person. When the briefing ended, she walked back outside into cold afternoon light. The base was quieter now, most personnel at chow or in briefings. She found a bench near the flight line and sat, watching helicopters take off and land in precise rotations. Her phone buzzed again. Not a threat this time. A message from Dr. Lansing. Heard you're okay. Shaw's stable. Ranger won't leave his side. When are you coming back? Olivia stared at the message. Coming back. As if she could just walk back into Crescent Valley Medical and pick up where she'd left off. As if the last 48 hours hadn't happened. As if she was still Olivia Reed, the quiet nurse nobody noticed. She wasn't that person anymore. Maybe she never had been. She typed a response. Not sure. Take care of Shaw. And Ranger. Before she could send it, footsteps approached. She looked up. Miles Carver stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Walk with me, he said. They walked the perimeter of the flight line in silence for a few minutes. Finally, Carver spoke. I need to know if you're ready for this. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. That's not what I asked. Carver stopped walking and turned to face her. Testifying isn't like running an op. You can't shoot your way out if things go bad. You'll be sitting in a room full of politicians who don't want the truth to come out, answering questions designed to make you look unreliable. They'll dig into your past, your mental health, the decade you spent hiding. They'll try to discredit you. Let them. Reed. Carver's voice was quiet. I've seen what happens to whistleblowers. Even when they're right, even when they have proof, the system chews them up. You testify against Mercer, you're putting a target on your back that never goes away. I've had a target on my back for 10 years, Olivia said. At least now I'm shooting back. Carver studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, but there's something you need to know. He pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. The headline read, Defense Contractor CEO Found Dead in Apparent Suicide. Olivia scanned the text. Richard Gable, CEO of Vanguard Defense Solutions, had been found in his home office with a gunshot wound to the head. Preliminary reports suggested suicide, but investigators were exploring other possibilities. Gable's company is one of the names in Kessler's files, Carver said. He was the primary contractor supplying weapons to the network that killed your team. You think it was suicide? I think it's convenient timing. Carver pocketed his phone. Someone's cleaning house. Gable knew too much. And now he's dead. Olivia's chest tightened. How many other names on that list are in danger? At least 6. We've put protective details on the ones we can reach, but some of them have gone underground. And Mercer? Still in Washington, still acting like nothing's wrong. Carver's jaw tightened. He knows we're coming for him. He's just arrogant enough to think he can weather the storm. Olivia thought about that, about a man so confident in his power that he believed he was untouchable, about the kind of arrogance it took to send soldiers into a death trap and sleep soundly afterward. Then let's make sure he can't, she said. The next 72 hours passed in a blur. Olivia spent most of her time in secured briefing rooms, going over testimony with lawyers and investigators. They prepped her for every possible question, every angle of attack the defense might use. They walked her through the timeline of Shadow Protocol's deployment, the intelligence they'd been given, the moment the ambush started. They asked her to describe her teammates, their names, their faces, their last words. It was excruciating, but necessary. Shaw was flown in on the second day. He'd recovered enough to sit upright, though his breathing was still labored and he moved like every step hurt. Ranger came with him, shadowing his every move with the intensity of a dog who'd already lost one handler and wasn't about to lose another. They met in a conference room with Hale, Carver, and Voss present. Shaw looked at Olivia for a long moment before speaking. "You saved my life," he said. His voice was rough, scarred from the ventilator tube. "You kept my team's memory alive," Olivia replied. "That's worth more." Shaw nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "The truth. Everything you saw in the Baltic, everything you remember from 10 years ago." They spent 3 hours going over Shaw's testimony. He remembered more than Olivia had hoped. Details about the reconnaissance mission that had brought him near Shadow Protocol's area of operations, the exact timing of the ambush, the faces of the cleanup crew he'd watched execute survivors. He also remembered seeing documentation afterward, reports that didn't match what had actually happened, casualty counts that were wrong, timelines that had been altered. "Someone rewrote the official record," Shaw said. "Made it look like Shadow Protocol had gone rogue, like the ambush was retribution for unauthorized actions." "That's how they justified burying the unit," Voss said. "If Shadow Protocol was operating outside their mandate, nobody would ask questions about their deaths." Olivia felt something cold settle in her chest. Her team hadn't just been killed. They'd been slandered, their reputations destroyed to cover up someone else's crimes. "We're fixing that," she said, "starting tomorrow." The hearing was scheduled for 0900 hours in a secure facility within the Pentagon. Olivia arrived at 0800, escorted by Hale and a security detail that looked more like a small army. They passed through multiple checkpoints, each one more invasive than the last. Metal detectors, biometric scans, background checks that probably went back to her childhood. The hearing room was smaller than she'd expected. Maybe 20 seats arranged in rows facing a curved table where 7 senators sat. Olivia recognized most of them from news coverage. Senator Mercer sat dead center, his expression neutral, his posture relaxed. He looked like a man without a care in the world. That was about to change. The committee chairman, Senator Rachel Brennan, a steel-haired woman from Montana with a reputation for not tolerating bullshit, called the hearing to order. Olivia was sworn in, her hand on a Bible she didn't believe in anymore, promising to tell the truth. She intended to keep that promise. Brennan started with softballs, background questions. How long had Olivia served? What was her role in Shadow Protocol? When had she been deployed to the desert? Olivia answered each question calmly, her voice steady. She'd practiced this. She knew how to stay composed. Then Mercer spoke. "Lieutenant Reed," he said. His voice was smooth, avuncular. "I want to start by thanking you for your service. What happened to Shadow Protocol was a tragedy, but I have to ask, after 10 years in hiding, after building a new life, why come forward now?" Olivia met his eyes. "Because someone used my unit's name to commit crimes, and because the people responsible need to be held accountable." "You're referring to the allegations made by Nathan Kessler." "I'm referring to evidence, bank records, communication logs, testimony from operatives who worked with the weapons network." Mercer leaned back in his chair, his expression patient. "Lieutenant, I've reviewed the materials you've provided. They're compelling, but they're also largely circumstantial. Without corroboration, without witnesses, I'm a witness." "You were unconscious for most of the ambush," Mercer said, "and you spent the next decade suffering from what I can only assume was severe trauma. PTSD, survivor's guilt. I'm not questioning your honesty, Lieutenant. I'm questioning whether your memories are reliable. The attack was smooth, professional, designed to sound sympathetic while planting doubt." Olivia had expected it. She didn't flinch. "My memories are reliable," she said, "but if you need corroboration, Lieutenant Marcus Shaw is here. He watched the ambush. He watched the cleanup crew execute survivors, and he can identify the same patterns in recent operations that match Shadow Protocol's tactics." Mercer's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation. He glanced at his colleagues, then back at Olivia. "I look forward to hearing Lieutenant Shaw's testimony," he said, "assuming it's as reliable as yours." The implication was clear. Shaw's credibility would be attacked the same way Olivia's had been. But Mercer had made a mistake. He'd shown his hand. He was worried. Shaw was called next. He entered the room slowly, Ranger at his side, and took the seat Olivia had just vacated. The dog lay at his feet,
eyes tracking every movement in the room. When Shaw was sworn in, his voice was steady despite the pain Olivia knew he was feeling.
Brennan asked him to recount what he'd seen in the Baltic. Shaw did, methodically, without embellishment. He described the precision of the attack on his team, the tactics, the execution, and then he described what he'd seen 10 years earlier, Shadow Protocol, moving through that compound, the ambush, the cleanup crew. The tactics were identical, Shaw said. Same breach methods, same communication protocols, same execution patterns. And you believe this was deliberate? Brennan asked. I believe someone trained those operators using Shadow Protocol's playbook, Shaw said. And I believe the people who ordered my team into that kill zone are the same people who ordered Lieutenant Reed's team into theirs. Mercer leaned forward. Lieutenant Shaw, you sustained significant injuries in the Baltic. You were sedated for days. Is it possible you're conflating memories, mixing past trauma with recent events? Shaw stared at him. No, sir. You're certain? I watched 3 of my teammates die in the Baltic. I'm not confused about what I saw. Mercer opened his mouth to respond, but Brennan cut him off. Senator, I think we've established Lieutenant Shaw's credibility. Let's move on. Mercer sat back, his jaw tight. He was losing control of the narrative. Olivia watched from the gallery as Voss took the stand next, presenting the financial evidence. Bank transfers, shell companies, communications between Mercer's office and defense contractors. It was damning, undeniable, but Mercer wasn't done. Colonel Voss, he said. These records were obtained by Nathan Kessler, correct? Yes. A man who spent 10 years running illegal operations under a stolen identity. A man who was building a case against corruption within the defense establishment, Voss corrected. A man who's now conveniently dead, Mercer said. Unable to testify, unable to be cross-examined. How do we know he didn't fabricate these records? Because they've been verified by independent forensic accountants, Voss said. Her voice was ice. And because they match classified communications we've obtained through separate channels. Mercer's expression hardened. What communications? Brennan gestured to an aide who distributed folders to each senator. Olivia couldn't see what was inside, but she watched Mercer's face as he opened his. The color drained from his cheeks. These are classified emails from your office, Brennan said. Sent 2 weeks before Shadow Protocol was deployed. They discuss operational details that shouldn't have been shared outside secure channels. They also reference payments to contractors, the same contractors Colonel Voss just identified. Mercer's hands were shaking now. Those emails are taken out of context. Are they? Brennan's voice was sharp. Because they seem pretty clear to me. You authorized payments. You shared intelligence. You knew Shadow Protocol was walking into an ambush, and you let it happen. The room went silent. Every senator was staring at Mercer now. His colleagues, people who'd worked with him for years. Olivia watched realization dawn on their faces. This wasn't a political hit job. This was real. Mercer stood abruptly. I won't be slandered by... Sit down, Senator, Brennan said, or I'll have you removed. Mercer sat. His hands were still shaking. Brennan continued. This committee will be referring these findings to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. Senator Mercer, you are hereby suspended from all committee activities pending the outcome of that investigation. Mercer's face went white. You can't... I just did. Brennan's gaze swept the room. This hearing is adjourned. The room erupted. Senators stood, aides scrambled, reporters who'd been listening from a separate room flooded toward the exits. Olivia sat frozen in her seat, watching Mercer being escorted out by security. He didn't look arrogant anymore. He looked terrified. Hale appeared beside her. You did it. Olivia shook her head. It's not over. No, Hale agreed. But it's a start. Olivia left the Pentagon an hour later. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Her phone was flooded with messages. News outlets requesting interviews, politicians offering support, colleagues from the hospital asking what the hell was going on. She ignored all of them. There was only one message she cared about. From an unknown number sent 30 minutes ago. You think you've won. You haven't. Mercer was a symptom. The disease is still alive. Olivia stared at the message. Ice flooded her veins. Mercer had been suspended. His career was over. But whoever sent this message wasn't worried, because Mercer wasn't the top of the pyramid. He was just another piece. Before she could respond, a black SUV pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. Miles Carver sat in the driver's seat, his expression grim. "Get in," he said. Olivia climbed into the passenger seat. "What's wrong?" "We just got word. Another body. Defense contractor named Victoria Lang, found in her apartment 2 hours ago. Single gunshot wound to the head." Olivia's stomach dropped. Staged suicide? Looks like it. Carver pulled out of the parking lot. That makes 2 contractors dead in 3 days. Someone's tying up loose ends. Who's next on the list? That's what I need you to help me figure out. Carver handed her a tablet showing Kessler's files. 6 names left. 6 people who can tie this conspiracy back to whoever's really running it. Olivia scrolled through the names. Contractors, lobbyists, a retired general, and one name that made her blood run cold. Admiral James Lockwood, the man who'd pulled her out of that desert, the man who'd given her a new identity, the man who'd died 6 months later of a convenient heart attack. "Lockwood's dead," she said. "Maybe," Carver said. "Or maybe that's what someone wanted us to think." Olivia stared at the name. If Lockwood was alive, if he'd faked his death the same way Kessler had tried to, then everything she'd believed about her survival was a lie. She hadn't been saved. She'd been relocated, kept alive for a reason she didn't understand. "Where do we start?" she asked. Carver's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then cursed under his breath. "We start with this." He showed her the screen. A news alert. Senator Douglas Mercer found dead in detention cell. Preliminary reports suggest suicide. Olivia's hands went numb. Mercer was dead. Less than 2 hours after being suspended. Less than 3 hours after the hearing that had destroyed his career. "This wasn't suicide," she said. "No," Carver agreed. "This was a message." The SUV's interior felt like it was closing in. Olivia stared at the news alert on Carver's phone, her mind racing through the implications. Mercer had been in federal custody. Secure facility, guards, cameras, and somehow someone had gotten to him anyway. "Who had access to his cell?" she asked. "That's what we're about to find out." Carver accelerated through a red light, flashing his credentials at a traffic camera. "But my guess? Someone with clearance high enough that nobody questioned them." Olivia's chest tightened. "You think it was internal?" "I think whoever's running this operation has people everywhere." Carver's jaw was tight. DOJ, Pentagon, maybe even FBI. Mercer knew that. That's why he was scared. Not scared enough to talk. Or he tried to talk and they silenced him before he could. Carver's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, cursed, and tossed it to Olivia. "Read that." It was an encrypted message, already decoded. Short, direct, terrifying. 3 targets remain. Reed, Shaw, Voss. Eliminate within 48 hours. Olivia's blood went cold. "When did this come through?" "It just grew 12 minutes ago. NSA intercepted it from a server in Singapore, but the origin point bounced through 17 countries. Could have come from anywhere." "Shaw's still at the hospital," Olivia said. She was already dialing Hale's number. "We need to move him." Hale answered on the first ring. "Reed." "Shaw's a target. So is Voss." "Where are they?" "Shaw's in protective custody at Walter Reed. Voss is—" He paused. "Shit. Voss left for a briefing at Langley 20 minutes ago, alone." Olivia's stomach dropped. "Get her on the phone, now!" She heard Hale making the call, heard his voice grow sharp with urgency, heard him leave a voicemail when Voss didn't pick up. Then silence. "She's not answering," Hale said. "Then we go to her." Olivia looked at Carver. "How far to Langley?" 30 minutes in this traffic." "Make it 15. Carver floored it. They reached CIA headquarters 18 minutes later, tires screaming as Carver pulled up to the security checkpoint. He flashed his credentials, barked something about an active threat, and they were waved through without the usual rigmarole. The parking structure was mostly empty. Evening shift, skeleton crew, and Olivia's boots echoed on concrete as they ran toward the elevators. Voss's office was on the 4th floor. They took the stairs, guns drawn, clearing corners like they were back in hostile territory. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. No agents, no staff, just fluorescent lights humming overhead and the distant sound of ventilation systems. Carver reached Voss's office first. The door was ajar. He pushed it open slowly, weapon raised, and Olivia followed him inside. The office was empty, desk clean, computer off. Nothing out of place except blood. Not a lot. Just a few drops on the carpet near the desk chair, fresh enough to still be wet. She was here, Olivia said. She knelt beside the blood, touched it with her fingertip, sticky, warm. Within the last few minutes, Carver was already on his radio, calling for backup, for a lockdown, for every available agent to converge on this location. But Olivia wasn't listening. She was scanning the room, looking for anything that would tell her where Voss had gone, or been taken. Her eyes landed on the desk calendar. Today's date was circled, with a note scrawled in Voss's handwriting, Lockwood File, Archives. Olivia's breath caught. She was going to the archives. Carver looked at her. What? Lockwood, the admiral who pulled me out of the desert. Voss was looking into his file. Olivia pointed at the calendar. She went to the archives. They ran. The archives were in the basement, 3 levels down, accessible only by keycard and biometric scan. Carver's credentials got them through the first checkpoint, but the second required Voss's authorization. He overrode it with an emergency code that would probably get him fired later, and they descended into a maze of filing cabinets and climate-controlled storage rooms that smelled like old paper and stale air. Voss! Carver's voice echoed off concrete walls. Colonel Voss! No answer. They moved deeper into the archives, past rows of classified files dating back decades. Cold War operations, covert actions that had never been acknowledged, secrets that were supposed to stay buried forever. Olivia's hand was steady on her weapon, her breathing controlled, but her pulse hammered in her ears. They found Voss in the back corner near a section marked Personnel Records, Deceased Officers. She was alive. Barely. Voss sat slumped against a filing cabinet, her hand pressed to her side where blood seeped through her uniform. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, but her eyes were open and alert. In her other hand, she clutched a file folder. Carver was beside her in an instant, pressing his jacket against the wound, calling for a medic on his radio. Olivia knelt on Voss's other side, checking her pulse, weak but steady. Who did this? Olivia asked. Voss's lips moved, but no sound came out. She tried again, forcing the words past the pain. Lockwood. Alive. Olivia's chest tightened. Where? Voss shook her head weakly. She lifted the file folder, hands trembling, and pressed it into Olivia's hands. Proof. Olivia opened the folder. Inside were documents she'd never seen before. Personnel records for Admiral James Lockwood. Medical reports. A death certificate dated 6 months after he'd relocated Olivia. And beneath that, something that made her blood run cold. Bank statements, showing transfers from the same shell companies that had paid Mercer. Millions of dollars spread across a decade. Payments that continued long after Lockwood's supposed death. He faked it, Olivia whispered. He's been alive this whole time. Voss nodded weakly. Running everything. The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. Lockwood hadn't saved Olivia out of mercy. He'd saved her because she was useful. A witness he could control. A ghost he could keep in his pocket in case he ever needed leverage. And when Kessler had started digging too deep, when Shaw had survived the Baltic ambush, Lockwood had activated his network to clean up the mess. Mercer, the contractors. All of them had been working for Lockwood. Where is he? Carver demanded. Voss's eyes were starting to close. Don't know. Moved after Mercer. Footsteps echoed from deeper in the archives. Heavy. Multiple people. Carver's hand went to his weapon, and Olivia moved to cover the opposite angle. But the footsteps didn't come closer. They faded, retreating toward the exit. They're running, Carver said. Or regrouping. Olivia looked at Voss, at the blood spreading despite Carver's pressure on the wound. We need to get her out of here. Paramedics arrived 3 minutes later. They stabilized Voss enough to transport, loaded her onto a stretcher, and rushed her toward the elevator. Carver went with them. Olivia stayed behind, staring at the open filing cabinet where Voss had found Lockwood's file. There were other files here. Other names. She pulled them out one by one, scanning them quickly. Classified operations, personnel records. And buried near the back, a folder marked Shadow Protocol, Post-Action Review. Olivia had never seen this file before. It shouldn't have existed. Shadow Protocol's records had been sealed, buried, erased. But here it was, dated 3 months after the ambush. She opened it. Inside were photographs, crime scene photos from the desert compound where her team had died. But these weren't official military documentation. These were personal, taken with a handheld camera, close-ups of bodies, of faces, of Shadow Protocol's insignia patches cut from uniforms. And at the bottom of the folder, a handwritten note. Assets acquired, protocols documented, unit ready for reactivation. The signature was illegible, but it didn't need to be legible. Olivia knew who'd written it. Lockwood had been planning this from the beginning. He'd let Shadow Protocol die, then harvested their tactics, their methods, their identity. He'd turned them into a commodity, something he could sell to the highest bidder. Her team hadn't just been betrayed, they'd been strip-mined. Olivia's hands shook as she closed the folder. Rage boiled in her chest, hot and consuming. For 10 years she'd believed Lockwood had saved her. For 10 years she'd carried guilt for surviving when her team hadn't, and all along Lockwood had been the architect of their deaths. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. You found the truth. Now ask yourself, why did Lockwood let you live? Olivia stared at the message. The question she'd been avoiding, the answer she'd been too afraid to face. Lockwood had kept her alive because she was insurance, proof that Shadow Protocol had existed, proof that could be weaponized if anyone got too close to exposing his operation. She wasn't a survivor, she was leverage. And now that she'd testified, now that she'd gone public, that leverage was worthless, which meant she was expendable. Her phone rang. Hale's number. Reed, where are you? Langley Archives. Voss is en route to the hospital. She'll make it. Good, because we've got a bigger problem. Hale's voice was tight. Shaw's protective detail just went dark. No radio contact. No check-ins. Olivia's blood went cold. When? 10 minutes ago. We're sending a response team to Walter Reed now, but I'm closer. Olivia was already running toward the elevator. I'm going. Reed, wait for backup. She hung up. The drive to Walter Reed took 12 minutes. Olivia broke every traffic law in existence, running red lights and weaving through traffic with the kind of reckless precision she hadn't used in a decade. Her weapon sat in her lap, chambered and ready. Her mind was running through tactical scenarios, calculating angles of attack, identifying potential ambush points. Walter Reed's front entrance was chaos. Ambulances, police cruisers, federal agents. Something had happened, and it had happened recently. Olivia abandoned the SUV in a no-parking zone and sprinted toward the building, flashing the credentials Carver had given her. A uniformed officer tried to stop her. Ma'am, this is a restricted... I'm with the investigation. She pushed past him. Where's Lieutenant Shaw? 4th floor. I see you, but you can't... Olivia was already inside. The 4th floor ICU was a war zone. Bullet holes in the walls, overturned equipment, blood smeared across the floor in drag patterns that told a story Olivia didn't want to read. 3 bodies lay near the nurse's station, Shaw's protective detail, all dead, all shot execution style. But Shaw wasn't among them. Neither was Ranger. Reed! Hale's voice. He emerged from one of the patient rooms, his uniform splattered with blood that wasn't his. They took him. Who? Tactical team. 4 operators, maybe 5. They breached through the stairwell, neutralized the guards, and grabbed Shaw before anyone could respond. Hale's expression was grim. Ranger tried to stop them. They shot him. Olivia's chest tightened. Is he alive? Barely. Vet's working on him now. Hale gestured toward a room where a veterinarian was performing emergency surgery on the dog. But Shaw's gone. They had a vehicle waiting in the parking garage, disappeared before we could lock down the exits. Olivia's mind raced. Shaw was the only other person who could corroborate her testimony. The only other witness who'd seen the ambush, the cleanup, the patterns connecting Lockwood to Shadow Protocol. Without him, the case fell apart. Where would they take him? She asked. Anywhere? Nowhere. They could execute him and dump the body, or they could keep him alive as leverage. No! Olivia shook her head. They won't kill him yet. They need to know what he told us, what evidence we have. So they'll interrogate him, and then they'll kill him. Olivia's voice was flat. We've got maybe 6 hours before they decide he's not useful anymore. Hale pulled out his phone, already coordinating with the FBI, with DOD, with every agency that had jurisdiction. But Olivia wasn't listening. She was thinking about Lockwood, about how he operated, about what he'd do in this situation. He'd go to ground, somewhere secure, somewhere off the books, a place he'd prepared years ago for exactly this kind of emergency. Her phone buzzed. Another message. You want Shaw back? Come alone. Coordinates attached. You have 2 hours. The coordinates pointed to a location in rural Virginia, 2 hours outside D.C., middle of nowhere. Perfect for an ambush. Olivia showed the message to Hale. His expression darkened. It's a trap. Obviously. Then we don't go. We coordinate with... They'll kill Shaw the moment they see backup. Olivia's voice was cold. This is the play. Lockwood wants me. I'm the last loose end. He gets me, he ties up the investigation. You're not going alone. I don't have a choice. Hale grabbed her arm. Reed, if you walk into that trap, you're dead. Maybe. Olivia met his eyes. But Shaw doesn't have 2 hours. He has maybe 1 before they decide he's told them everything they need to know, so I'm going, with or without your approval. Hale stared at her for a long moment. Then he released her arm and pulled out his phone. I'm sending a tactical team to shadow you. They'll stay a mile back, out of sight. But the moment things go sideways, they move in. Olivia nodded. Fine. And Reed? Hale's expression was grim. Don't do anything stupid. Too late for that. She left the hospital and climbed back into Carver's SUV. The coordinates glowed on her phone screen, counting down the minutes until the 2-hour deadline. She plugged them into the GPS and started driving. The route took her west, away from the city, into farmland and forest. Traffic thinned, civilization faded. By the time she hit the 1-hour mark, she was driving on 2-lane roads with no streetlights and no cell signal. Perfect place to disappear. The coordinates led to an abandoned industrial complex, an old munitions factory, judging by the faded warning signs and rusted fencing. The kind of place that had been decommissioned decades ago and left to rot. Olivia parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, moving through the tree line with the same stealth tactics Shadow Protocol had drilled into her. The complex was dark. No lights, no movement, but she could feel eyes on her, watching, waiting. She keyed her radio, a secure channel Hale had given her before she left. I'm at the perimeter. No visual on hostiles. Copy. Hale's voice crackled back. Tactical team is in position. Say the word and they breach. Stand by. Olivia moved closer, her weapon up, scanning for threats. The main building loomed ahead, 3 stories of crumbling concrete and broken windows. A side door hung open, inviting, too inviting. She circled the building instead, looking for alternate entrances. Found a loading dock with a rusted roll-up door that had been forced open recently. Fresh marks on the concrete, boot prints in the dust. This was the way in. She slipped through the gap, her eyes adjusting to the darkness inside. The loading dock opened into a warehouse space, empty except for old machinery and decades of accumulated debris. Her boots crunched on broken glass. Every sound echoed. Shaw! Her voice rang out. I know you're here! No response. She moved deeper into the warehouse, her weapon sweeping corners, checking shadows. The air smelled like rust and decay, like something that had been dead for a long time. Then she heard it, a groan, muffled, coming from above. She found the stairs and climbed to the 2nd floor. The groaning grew louder. She followed it to a room at the end of the hallway, an old office maybe, with a desk and filing cabinets that had been pushed against the walls. Shaw was tied to a chair in the center of the room. His face was bruised, his lips split, blood crusting under his nose. But he was alive, conscious. Olivia rushed toward him. Shaw, don't! His voice was rough, desperate. It's a trap! Too late. The door slammed shut behind her, locks engaged, and a voice she hadn't heard in 10 years spoke from the shadows. Hello, Lieutenant Bennett. Admiral James Lockwood stepped into the light. He looked older than she remembered, grayer, harder, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, devoid of remorse. He wore civilian clothes, not a uniform, and held a pistol loosely at his side. You've been busy, he said, testifying, exposing Mercer, making quite a mess of my operation. Olivia's weapon was still up, trained on his chest. "It's over, Lockwood. The files are public. The hearings have started. You can't bury this anymore." "No," Lockwood agreed, "but I can bury you." He raised his pistol. Olivia fired first. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Lockwood's body jerked backward, his pistol clattering to the floor. But he didn't fall. He stumbled against the wall, hand pressed to his shoulder where blood was already seeping through his shirt, and he laughed. It was a terrible sound, bitter, exhausted. "You always were a good shot," he said. Olivia kept her weapon trained on him, her finger still on the trigger. "On the ground. Now. Or what? You'll shoot me again?" Lockwood's laugh turned into a cough. "Go ahead. But it won't change anything. The network's still operational. My people are still out there. You kill me, someone else takes my place." "Then I'll find them too." Lockwood pushed himself upright, his face pale, but his eyes still sharp. "You really think you've won? That testifying in front of some senators will bring justice? They'll bury this investigation the same way they buried Shadow Protocol. Give it 6 months, a year, and everything goes back to how it was. Not this time." Olivia moved toward Shaw, keeping her weapon on Lockwood. She pulled a knife from her belt and started cutting through the zip ties binding Shaw's wrists. Because this time, the truth's already out. Media has the files. Independent investigators are reviewing the evidence. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. Can I? Lockwood's voice was cold. "Lieutenant, you're thinking like a soldier. This isn't a war you can win with bullets. This is politics, money, power. The people I work with own newspapers, buy senators, control narratives. By tomorrow morning, you'll be labeled a conspiracy theorist, a traumatized veteran with an axe to grind. They'll discredit you, Shaw, Voss, everyone who testified." Shaw's hands came free. He stumbled forward, gasping, and Olivia steadied him. "Can you walk?" "Yeah." Shaw's voice was rough, but his eyes were clear, angry. "Let me put a bullet in him?" "No." Olivia pulled Shaw toward the door. "He's not worth it." "The hell he isn't." The door exploded inward. Hale came through first, rifle up, flanked by 6 tactical operators in full gear. They swept the room in seconds, weapons trained on Lockwood, who raised his hand slowly. Blood dripped from his shoulder wound, pooling on the concrete floor. "Clear!" one of the operators called. Hale lowered his rifle and looked at Olivia. "You good?" "Yeah." She holstered her weapon. "Shaw needs medical attention." 2 medics rushed in, checking Shaw's vitals, treating his injuries. Olivia watched them work, feeling the adrenaline start to drain from her system. Her hands were shaking now. Her legs felt weak. She'd been running on rage and momentum for days, and suddenly it was all catching up to her. Hale moved to her side. "Tactical team recorded everything. Audio, video. Lockwood's confession is on tape." Olivia nodded, but she couldn't take her eyes off Lockwood. The Admiral stood against the wall, handcuffed now, flanked by 2 operators. He was still smiling, that cold, arrogant smile that said he believed he'd walk away from this somehow. "He thinks he's untouchable," she said quietly. "Then we prove him wrong." Hale gestured toward the door. "Come on, let's get out of here." They escorted Lockwood out of the warehouse in full view of the media circus that had assembled outside. News crews, cameras, reporters shouting questions. Hale had tipped them off deliberately. This wasn't going to be a quiet arrest. This was going to be public, undeniable. Lockwood's face went rigid when he saw the cameras. The smile disappeared. For the first time since Olivia had confronted him, he looked genuinely afraid. "Admiral James Lockwood," Hale announced, his voice carrying over the crowd. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, treason, and the murders of 12 military personnel. You have the right to remain silent." The rest of the Miranda warning was drowned out by shouting reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Lockwood tried to keep his head down, tried to hide his face, but there was nowhere to hide now. The world was watching. Olivia stood at the edge of the crowd, watching him being loaded into a federal transport. Shaw stood beside her, bandaged and bruised, but standing under his own power. Ranger, somehow alive, somehow still fighting, leaned against Shaw's leg, his tail wagging weakly. "It's over," Shaw said. Olivia shook her head. "Not yet." The next 72 hours were a blur. Lockwood was arraigned on federal charges. His network began to collapse as operatives scrambled to cut deals, to offer testimony in exchange for reduced sentences. Bank accounts were frozen. Shell companies dissolved. The entire infrastructure Lockwood had built over a decade came apart like wet tissue paper. Mercer's death was ruled a homicide. The guard who'd been on duty during his suicide confessed under interrogation that he'd been paid to look the other way while someone else, a contractor hired by Lockwood, had entered Mercer's cell and staged the hanging. The contractor was arrested attempting to flee the country. Victoria Lang and Richard Gable's deaths were re-examined, both ruled homicides, both tied back to Lockwood's network. Colonel Voss survived her injuries. She was released from the hospital 4 days after the surgery, weak but alive, and immediately returned to work coordinating the investigation. When reporters asked her how it felt to nearly die exposing corruption, she'd said simply, "Better than living with it." Shaw recovered slowly. The injuries from the Baltic ambush had been severe, and the beating he'd taken during his kidnapping hadn't helped. But he was stubborn. He refused to stay in the hospital longer than necessary. He testified again, this time in open hearings broadcast live, describing everything he'd seen: the ambush, the cleanup crew, the patterns connecting Lockwood to a decade of illegal operations. And Ranger recovered too. The veterinarian who'd operated on him said it was a miracle the dog had survived. The bullet had missed his heart by centimeters, but Ranger had fought through blood loss and shock and come out the other side, because that's what combat dogs did. They didn't quit. Olivia returned to Crescent Valley Medical 2 weeks after Lockwood's arrest. She didn't announce her return. She just showed up for a night shift wearing scrubs that still didn't fit right and checked in with the charge nurse like nothing had happened. Dr. Lansing found her in the break room an hour into her shift. "Reed." His voice was careful. "I wasn't sure you'd come back. Neither was I." Olivia poured herself coffee that smelled like it had been sitting on the burner for 6 hours. "But I'm not done yet." Lansing sat across from her. For a moment he just studied her face, the fading bruise on her jaw, the dark circles under her eyes, the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like concrete. "You saved a lot of lives," he said finally. "Not just Shaw. All the people Lockwood would have hurt if you hadn't stopped him." Olivia shook her head. "I didn't stop him. I just exposed him. There's a difference." "Is there?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. Lockwood was in custody, but his trial would take years. Appeals, delays, legal maneuvering, and even if he was convicted, even if he spent the rest of his life in prison, it wouldn't bring back Shadow Protocol. It wouldn't undo the decade of lies. It wouldn't give Olivia back the 10 years she'd spent hiding. But it was something. "I need to take some time," she said. "Sort things out. Figure out what comes next." Lansing nodded. "Your job will be here when you're ready." "Thanks." She finished her shift, then drove home to the apartment she barely recognized anymore. It felt like someone else's life, someone else's furniture, someone else's quiet, invisible existence. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the walls, and realized she couldn't stay here. Not anymore. So she didn't. She packed what mattered: clothes, a few books, some photographs she'd never been able to throw away, and left everything else behind. The furniture, the dishes, the life she'd built on a foundation of lies. Let the landlord keep the security deposit. Let someone else live in that space. She was done with it. She drove north, following instinct more than destination. Ended up at Arlington National Cemetery just after sunrise. The grounds were quiet, peaceful, covered in morning dew. She walked through rows of white headstones until she found what she was looking for: a memorial stone. Not individual graves. Shadow Protocol's bodies had never been recovered, but a single marker listing their names: Captain Miranda Wells, Sergeant First Class David Ortega, Corporal Lena Hayes, 9 others, all declared killed in action, all buried under classified circumstances, all forgotten by everyone except the woman standing in front of their memorial. Olivia knelt in the grass, her hand resting on the cold marble. She'd tried to say something here before, years ago, but the words had never come. They'd stuck in her throat, choking her. Today, they came easily. "I'm sorry it took so long," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady. "I should have fought harder. Should have exposed Lockwood years ago, but I was scared, I was tired, She stopped, started again.
I survived, and you didn't, and I spent 10 years hating myself for that. But I'm done hating. I'm done hiding. You deserve better than what they did to you, so I made sure the world knows. I made sure your names mean something again." The words hung in the air. No response, no absolution. Just silence and birdsong and the distant sound of a flag snapping in the wind. Olivia stood. She didn't feel lighter, she didn't feel forgiven, but she felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening, a release. She'd carried their deaths for 10 years. Maybe it was time to carry something else instead. Her phone buzzed, a text from Hale. Lockwood's pleading guilty. Taking a deal to avoid trial, life without parole. Thought you'd want to know. Olivia stared at the message. Life without parole. No trial. No public testimony. Lockwood would spend the rest of his life in a cell, and the full scope of what he'd done would remain partially hidden behind classified barriers. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was enough. She typed a response. "Thanks. Tell Voss I'll call her later." She pocketed her phone and walked back toward her car. Halfway there, she stopped, turned, looked back at the memorial stone one last time. "I'll come back," she said, "I promise." And she would, not to apologize, not to beg forgiveness, but to remember, to honor, to make sure Shadow Protocol wasn't just a name on a classified file or a cautionary tale about operations gone wrong. They'd been people, real people who'd trusted the system and paid for that trust with their lives. Olivia wouldn't let them be forgotten. She drove back into the city, but not toward her old apartment. Instead, she headed toward Walter Reed, where Shaw was finishing his physical therapy. She found him in the PT room, working through exercises with grim determination, while Ranger lay on the floor nearby, watching every movement. "Reed," Shaw's face lit up when he saw her. "Heard you went back to the hospital." "For about 12 hours. She leaned against the doorframe. "Figured out I can't go back to pretending I'm just a nurse." "So what are you going to do?" Olivia had been asking herself that question for 2 weeks. She'd considered re-enlisting, going back to the military, picking up where she'd left off, but that life was over. She wasn't Lieutenant Sarah Bennett anymore, and she couldn't force herself back into that uniform. She also couldn't go back to being Olivia Reed, the invisible nurse who faded into the background. So she'd have to become something else. "I'm going to train people," she said. "Combat medics, tactical operators, people who need to know how to save lives in the worst possible circumstances. I spent 10 years hiding what I knew. I'm done with that." Shaw's expression shifted. Respect, understanding. "That's good. That's good. What about you?" "Voss offered me a position with DIA, consulting on covert operations, making sure what happened to Shadow Protocol doesn't happen to anyone else." Shaw grimaced. "I don't know if I'm ready to go back yet, but I can't just sit around either." "Then don't." Olivia pushed off the doorframe. "We both survived for a reason. Might as well make it count." Shaw nodded slowly. Then he extended his hand. "To making it count." Olivia shook his hand. "To making it count." They talked for another hour. About the investigation, about the contractors who were being arrested daily as Lockwood's network collapsed, about the politicians scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal, about the media coverage that had turned Shadow Protocol from a classified footnote into a national conversation about accountability and oversight. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And real was all Olivia wanted anymore. She left Walter Reed as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of the desert. For years, she'd avoided those memories, pushed them down, buried them. Now she let them surface. She remembered Captain Wells teaching her how to clear a building, Ortega making jokes during downtime, Hayes sharing a cigarette on the night before their final mission. She remembered who she'd been before the ambush, before the hiding, before the decade of silence. And she realized that person was still there. Buried, scarred, but still there. Her phone rang, Carver's number. "Reed, you busy?" "Not particularly." "Good, because I've got something you might be interested in." Carver's voice was businesslike, but there was an edge of excitement underneath. "We're setting up a task force, joint DoD and FBI, focused on investigating corruption within defense contracting and military operations. Voss is leading it. She wants you on the team." Olivia's chest tightened. "As what?"
consultant, investigator, whatever you want to call it. Your experience with Shadow Protocol makes you uniquely qualified to identify patterns, spot cover-ups, understand how these operations work from the inside. I'm not military anymore. You don't have to be. This is civilian oversight with teeth. No more classified barriers protecting the guilty. No more burying evidence to protect careers. We're going after everyone Lockwood worked with and everyone like him. Olivia was quiet for a moment, processing. This was what she'd been looking for. Purpose, direction, a way to turn the last 10 years of pain into something constructive. When do I start? Tomorrow, if you're ready. I'm ready. Carver gave her the details, where to report, who to contact, what clearances she'd need. When he finished, he paused. Reed, for what it's worth, you did good. You stopped something terrible, and you made sure your team didn't die in vain. They still died. Yeah, but now the world knows why. And now we're making sure it doesn't happen again. That counts for something. Olivia ended the call and stood in the parking lot, watching the last light fade from the sky. Carver was right. It counted for something. Not everything, not enough, but something. She thought about Shadow Protocol, about the memorial stone at Arlington, about the names carved into marble, about the promise she'd made. She'd come back. She'd remember. She'd honor them. But she'd also keep fighting, because that's what they would have wanted. 3 months later, Olivia stood in front of a Senate subcommittee. Different senators, different hearing, same questions about accountability and oversight. But this time, she wasn't testifying as a victim. She was testifying as an expert. Part of the task force that had dismantled what remained of Lockwood's network and uncovered 3 additional corruption schemes within defense contracting. The cameras didn't bother her anymore. The questions didn't rattle her. She answered each one calmly, methodically, laying out evidence and patterns and recommendations for systemic change. When it was over, when the chairman thanked her for her service and adjourned the hearing, Olivia walked out into the hallway and found Shaw waiting. Ranger sat at his side, fully recovered now, his tail wagging. "How'd it go?" Shaw asked. "Good. They're actually listening this time." "Progress?" "Yeah." They walked out of the building together into afternoon sunlight that was warm without being oppressive. Washington in the fall. Beautiful and treacherous at the same time. "You still running that training program?" Shaw asked. "Starting next month. Got 20 medics signed up. Mix of military and civilian." Olivia glanced at him. "You interested?" "Maybe. If you need an instructor." "I always need instructors." They reached the street where Hale was waiting beside a government SUV. He'd been promoted, lieutenant colonel now, overseeing the military's cooperation with the task force. He nodded when he saw them. "Reed, Shaw, we've got a situation brewing in Germany. Defense contractor with ties to Lockwood's network. Might need your eyes on it." Olivia felt the familiar pull, the call to action, the sense that there was work to be done, and she was one of the few people who could do it. "When?" she asked. 2 weeks. Plenty of time to wrap up your current cases." "I'll be ready." Hale smiled. "I know you will." He drove away, leaving Olivia and Shaw standing on the sidewalk. The city hummed around them. Traffic, voices, the constant motion of a place that never stopped. For years, Olivia had felt disconnected from all of it. Like she was watching the world through glass. Now she felt present, engaged, alive. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if none of this had happened?" Shaw asked. "If Shadow Protocol hadn't been ambushed, if you'd finished your service and moved on?" Olivia considered the question. "I don't know. Maybe I'd have stayed in, made a career of it. Or maybe I'd have gotten out and done something completely different. Opened a coffee shop, learned to paint." "You don't strike me as a painter." "I'm not." She smiled. "But I like to think I could have been." They walked in silence for a while. Then Shaw said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you exposed Lockwood. And I'm glad you're still fighting." Olivia looked at him, at this man who'd carried his own trauma, his own survivor's guilt, his own decade of questions, who'd risked everything to tell the truth. "Me too," she said, and she meant it, because somewhere along the way, between the hospital and the hearings and the investigations, Olivia had stopped seeing herself as a ghost. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't apologizing for surviving. She was standing in the light, using every skill Shadow Protocol had taught her, honoring her team's memory by making sure their deaths hadn't been meaningless. She was still scarred, still carrying weight, still waking up some nights with the sound of explosions ringing in her ears. But she was also moving forward, and that was enough. 6 months after Lockwood's arrest, Olivia returned to Arlington. The memorial stone looked the same, weathered marble, carved names, American flags planted in the grass nearby. But something had changed. Someone had left flowers, fresh ones, and a note. Thank you for fighting for them. A grateful citizen. Olivia picked up the note, reading it twice. She didn't know who'd left it, probably never would. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that people knew that Shadow Protocol's story had been told, that their names meant something again. She knelt beside the memorial and placed her hand on the stone. We did it, she said quietly. Lockwood's in prison. His network's destroyed. And your names are cleared. You're not footnotes anymore. You're heroes. The way you always should have been. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of cut grass and autumn leaves. Olivia closed her eyes and let herself remember. Not just the ambush, not just the pain, but the good parts too. The camaraderie, the trust, the moments when her team had been more than soldiers, they'd been family. I miss you, she said. Every day. But I'm not stuck anymore. I'm moving forward, fighting the fights you can't, making sure what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. She stood brushing grass from her knees. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cemetery. In the distance, a bugler played taps. The mournful notes carried on the wind, a reminder of sacrifice and loss and the price of service. Olivia saluted the memorial, not because protocol demanded it, not because anyone was watching, but because her team deserved that respect, that acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked back toward her car, where Shaw and Ranger were waiting. They were heading to dinner, then to a briefing about the Germany operation, then to whatever came next. Because that's what survivors did. They kept moving forward, they kept fighting, they kept honoring the fallen by refusing to give up. And as Olivia drove away from Arlington, the memorial stone growing smaller in her rearview mirror, she felt something she hadn't felt in 10 years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, not the erasure of memory, but the knowledge that she'd done everything she could, that she'd told the truth, that she'd made sure Shadow Protocol's sacrifice hadn't been forgotten. She was Lieutenant Sarah Bennett. She was Olivia Reed. She was both and neither, and something new. She was a survivor who refused to stay silent, and that was the most powerful thing she could be. The quiet nurse nobody noticed had become the woman who'd brought down an empire of corruption. The ghost had become the reckoning, and the soldier who'd been left for dead had proven that some fights are worth surviving for, not because the ending is perfect, but because fighting back, standing up when they expect you to stay down, speaking truth when they demand silence, choosing justice over comfort, is the only way to honor the people you've lost. Shadow Protocol died in the desert, but their legacy lived on, in every corrupt official brought to justice, in every life saved by the reforms Olivia fought for, in every soldier who would never face betrayal because someone had finally said enough. The system hadn't wanted the truth, but one nurse with nothing left to lose had given it to them anyway, and that changed everything.